Namaste. There is partial liberation happening. Partial liberation happening after the collapse, the falling away of the me, after collapse, the falling away of the seeker. There is the witness. And in that partial liberation, there is still embodiment, bodying. And even after the falling away and the death or the collapse of the me, and the death and the collapse, the falling away of the seeker, what remains? Does any aspect of self remain? Yes. That aspect of self that remains is the witness. And yet in partial liberation, after the collapse of the me, and after the collapse of the seeker, there are residues. Residues of what? Residues of that collapse. Residues of that me. Is there some type of place or a point or the apparent appearance of somewhere and somehow that residue that the falling away caused, the falling away of the me and the collapse of that falling away of the me and the collapse and falling away of the seeker, the residue remains. The residue remains from that collapse of the me and seeker in partial liberation via embodiment. The residue settles in the environment of the body. In the environment of the embodiment bodying, is there now mindfulness? There is the witnessing by a witness, mindfulness. Mindfulness of what now? Well, the me collapsed, the seeker collapsed. There's no longer evidence that the me and the seeker are sensing separation. The sense of separation is no longer witnessed. Now, there is what? In partial liberation after the me and the seeker have fallen away. There is the witness, bearing witness to all that simply is everything and no thing, both appearing or making an appearance or causing it to seemingly be an appearance of aliveness, of life happening. It is non-dual in nature. It is everything and nothing simultaneously, both appearing as real and unreal. And yet, there's a witness. Now, the witness that's witnessing all that is, it simply is, life happening, the unconditional love that is in everything. And this is why it is spoken of by a me, by a representation of self that refers to by name as Rupert Spira, that even in objects a cup, a bottle, a pen, any object that has the apparent appearance of residue of form, of matter. It is said that there's the apparent appearance of matter and form. That simply is experienced. That description of matter as form in the concepts of science and scientific modalities and scientific concepts, even with what is referred to as the hard problem, even in the merging of science and non-duality, it is spoken and it is mentioned via consciousness researchers such as Anthony Peake in London, England. There is the American equivalent, Dr. Thomas Campbell, the ex-NASA physicist. That is a me doing this thing. Doing what thing? Well, still me over there. Is that good or bad? No, it's just what's happening. Alright. So there. So there is the duality that's happening, and then there is the non-duality that's happening. It is the apparent appearance of duality happening, and in that duality, that sense of separation, there is much dis-ease and much suffering that is witnessed. In that sense of separation, with a me defending itself with a seeker, having the seeker continuing to seek information to support that there's an individual, that there's a person there, there's an individual, individualized and separate from all that is. And in that sense of separation, there is much suffering. Because a me made up a story in self-reflection. The self-reflection as separateness began to be experienced in the apparent appearance of being born, and then the involvement of a me or two me's, two individuals that were in a sense of separation, provided a me with a birth name and a birthright and a lineage and a family tree and so on and so forth. And then begins the story of separation, and then there begins the separateness, the suffering. From what? From all this, from all that is, the oneness that was already there. That sense of separation is a story that's non-fiction. It's non-fiction. It's delusion. It's not true. Seems to be happening, yeah. But it only seems to be happening for whom? For that me. And the me has a collaborator, has a seeker. And with the conjoining, with the combination, that duality of separateness, the sense of separation, in that duality there's the seeker and there's the me, and they're collaborating, doing what? Separating. The action of the self separating from all that is, from all that is perfect, all that is whole, all that is divine, all that is unconditional love, all that is everything and no thing, simultaneously appearing as real and unreal. And yet in that sense of separation, the stories that continue of me's and seekers supporting one another in what, and how do they go about doing that? How is that suffering continuing? The suffering is continuing via the conjoining, the combination of induality and separation of a me and the seeker collaborating to support that it is a person, as an individual that matters more than the other me. The me is witnessing. The me has a witness, yes, but the witness is witnessing separation via the suffering that goes on as a me tries to support and say that I matter, the me matters. When I say I, that is that representation of the separation itself that is there, the beginning of that story, the beginning of the story of separation. The me and the seeker are collaborating to do what? And what type of action appears to be happening there in that sense of separation? As it removes self from the oneness and the unconditional love of all that simply is, that is perfect, that is whole, that is complete, is divine, is sacred. But a recognition of that sacredness, of that divine nature, of the oneness, of the unconditional love that permeates all of creation, everything that is witnessed, everything that is known and everything that is unknowable. Just as the luminosity of the sun shines upon all embodiments of me's and seekers and of all selves in all that is. That luminosity of aliveness is witnessed. The witness bears witness to that with greater clarity once what occurs, what happens. Well, the collapse of the me and the collapse of the seeker are no longer in that sense of separation that is suffering, that is restriction, that is going, oh me, oh man, I matter. Seeker, what do you have for me today, Seeker? Well, I've gathered some information on the internet, and I found out that there's some other groups, some other religions forming. Oh, great. Let me hear it. What is it? Suffering, man, suffering. And you know what? You know the process by which and how that's happening? How is that dis-ease and suffering and separation happening? It's happening with three components that are supporting the me and the seeker. And that's ego. Ego's one of them. Fears. It's another one. The force of fear. And the energy of fear. The energy and the force of ego is very strong. The fears supporting the ego is strong. And a me and a seeker that are collaborating in that separation, in that duality. The dis-ease is great. The dis-ease is suffering. And it's interfering with the self. There's that still small voice of the witness there. That is calling out. In the oneness that was already there prior to the collapse prior to the collapse, when the story began of a me and a seeker, of the concepts and the ideas of individuality and duality, of individuality. There it is. Duality is in individuality, and that is in the separation, the sense of separation of the self. The self is unified prior to that contraction that happens. Is there a source? It's similar to a fractal. It's like a flea on a flea on a flea. It's like a fractal on a fractal on a fractal. Can't trace that back. It was already in place. It was already everything and nothing as well. So what happened there? One may ask. Self may ask this. Self may inquire. Of course, because inquiring minds want to know. Me's and seekers want to know. They need the knowledge. They want to know that. That's why the me sends out the seeker to find knowledge of supporting this. Although it's suffering, and although it's just like in the Matrix, you know, this steak tastes so good, it tastes so great. I'm not, you know what? I don't want to be unplugged. And that was Cyrus, remember? Meanwhile, there's partially liberated Neos. We use a metaphor loosely, using the Matrix analogy. There is partial liberation simply because, yes, there is a because, a cause of being. That is what the word, the term because means. To be cause. To be cause of what? There is cause, the apparent appearance of causation that is there in the suffering of the sense of separation when there is a me collaborating with a seeker. And all the while in partial liberation, there is the witness that is one with all that is. It is that sense of oneness. Not sense of separation, but sense of oneness. The sense of oneness is the experience of reaching out and being closer to all that is whole, that is perfect, that is divine, that is sacred. And so the suffering continues when there is a me that's still in separation, experiencing that duality, that separateness, that duality, right, wrong, good, bad, this is better, that's worse. This needs to be this way, no, it needs to be that way. Pulling and tugging of duality. That's the me's and the seekers doing that. The me's and the seekers collaborating in that suffering, in that vicious cycle, vicious circle of making every effort that the me can muster along with the seeker in that sense of separation that is great suffering. There is great suffering in that sense of separation, until there is a collapse of that me, the falling away of the me and the seeker. That just spontaneously happens. How and when it happens cannot be described, because it's not a when the collapse of the me and the seeker happen. Self, the collective consciousness, which is the self, the collective self that is represented in all of the partially liberated embodiments, okay? when there is speech, when there are talks of non-duality, when there is speech mentioned and heard about non-duality, Advaita Vedanta, when that is heard or when that is expressed, that is all that simply is expressing in that manner via partial liberation and via embodiment with a witness that is there after the collapse of the me and the seeker. There is a process. There is the apparent appearance of that process happening. And that is what partial liberation is about, and that's what a true awakening is. Now, is there a true awakening and a false awakening? No. There's no true awakening and no concise false awakening. Is there a right way and a wrong way of doing this? No, that's duality. That's the old way that the me used to handle all that is, handle life. The me and the seeker collaborated to handle life in that manner. To do what? To believe in fear and with ego that it was going to find an answer to all of this that appears to be happening. And to give the me a reason and a purpose. All that is, it simply is, does not require a purpose of any me, or anyone, anybody, or any seeker that is trying to seek that which cannot be sought. What cannot be sought by a seeker? An explanation about all that simply is, whole, perfect, complete, divine, sacred, unconditional love. Doesn't need a description. Does it require a description? It simply is. It's simply this. It's fine the way it is. It's perfect the way it is. And yet, a me believes that it needs to answer. It needs to provide an answer to life happening. Life happening is simply happening. It does not require an explanation, does not require a definition for it. It is simply perfection. And all that simply is in that non-duality, in that oneness to that degree, which is the glimpse that is being witnessed, which is how that process of awakening occurs. It is the apparent appearance of an occurrence. It is the apparent appearance of a process whereby there is suddenly this subtle shift that appears to be experienced and happen when there is the collapse of the me and the falling away of the me. And then the seeker is exposed. The seeker is, where are you going, me? Hey, we're not done yet here, are we? The me goes, you know what? It's useless, forget it. I don't want no more part of this. Why? The witness is there to witness not only the collapse of the me, but also the seeker that is about to collapse as well, and it will. It no longer has the me to support it. So then the seeker collapses, falls away, it's gone. What is left? What remains with self? Is there anything else with self at that point? There is the recognition of a witness. Muji refers to a witness. Yes, that can be said, what is happening in the process of awakening. In Advaita Vedanta, in non-duality, that is what happens. After the collapse of the me and the collapse of the seeker, there is still a witness. How is that so? That is so because there is the apparent appearance of embodiment that anchors the witness to provide the experiencer, that is the witness, of all that is, to witness not only the collapse of the me and the seeker, but also now with greater clarity to now see the panoramic view even clearer. There's more clarity now. Now that the me and the seeker are no longer interfering, they got out of the way. They collapsed. They fell away, and they are no longer interfering with the witness. Impartial liberation. Why? Because. Yeah, there is a cause. There is a because. The cause of being. The cause of that being in partial liberation is the witness that is there. That's been that still small voice all along calling out. That's that deep intuition. You can call it that as well. That intuitiveness that was in the background, just witnessing. That witness was just witnessing the me and the seeker doing its thing. And it was dis-ease, it was suffering for the self, and part of the self was suffering, and the witness is going, oh man, it's so uncomfortable, but yet, you know what? Long withstanding patience. Be patient, the witness, self, that is one with all that is. Yeah? It's patient. Very, very patient. Very tolerable. Extremely tolerable. Does it know? Does a witness have some type of knowing that there will one day, well, I'd say one day, or will there be a moment of collapse that will happen? Of that me and seeker that are suffering in separation? It's inevitable. It's inevitable. It's inevitable for the witness to bear witness to not only in partial liberation, the collapse of the me and the collapse of the seeker, but it will also bear witness to absolute liberation. Well, is there a when, or a how, or a why that absolute liberation happens? No, it just happens. If absolute liberation is happening, it is the witness that will be witnessing the death and the collapse of embodiment. The body that once was a representation of the me and the seeker, the apparent appearance of that was happening. Here's the final stage of enlightenment, of true liberation, of absolute liberation. Not partial liberation. There is still partial liberation, and there's still talks of non-duality, and there are still talks, and there's still speech about non-duality. There are the Lisa Cairns, there's the Jim Newmans, there are the Tony Parsons. All of those partially liberated selves that are with all that is in oneness, collectively. That is a collective consciousness of selves that are partially liberated because they too have witnesses that are doing what? Witnessing via embodiment. Simultaneously happening. There's a process. It's a type of seemingly apparent appearance of evolution of consciousness happening. That process of the collapse of the me, the collapse of the seeker, and then the witness showing up, and then there's a partial liberation. There's a recognition of all that is. It simply is. Everything and nothing simultaneously, real and unreal, appearing as such. Appearing that way. Appearing that way to what? Appearing that way to whom? It's not a whom. It's not a what. It is the essence of self, which is consciousness, which is in partial liberation, and recognizes that in partial liberation because it is illumined. It is enlightened to that degree. There is enlightenment to that degree. There's an awakening to that degree whereby there's still the witness of partial liberation via embodiment. Yeah. There's the witness that witnessed that. And non-duality in Advaita Vedanta, and non-duality, they speak. It is speaking. It is bearing witness to that. So it is the collective consciousness of all that is bearing witness to the collapses of me's and the collapses of seekers, and getting closer away from separation and returning to the oneness of all that is in partial liberation. Which is the reason behind the speech of non-duality and the speech of Advaita Vedanta happening. There is the witnessing of self in the collective consciousness, witnessing self partially liberated and still apparently appearing with the embodiment that's just a shell now. That's all it is. It is a shell, or likened to the vehicle by which the me and the seeker held the suffering of separation, that sense of separation. The me with the seeker, we're collaborating to do that in that suffering, that sense of separation. That's what was happening and happens. And so there is liberation from that via Advaita Vedanta, non-duality. And as this Advaita Vedanta and non-duality is spoken of, it is similar to a collapse happening. It is similar to the sense of separation collapsing and returning to oneness with all that is, simply is, everything and nothing appearing as both real and unreal simultaneously. And that, although is partial liberation, because there is still the representation and the apparent appearance of embodiment with a witness speaking of non-duality. There is the witness speaking of non-duality, Advaita Vedanta. The recognition of all that simply is clearer. The clarity of that. And the sensation, the feeling of the unconditional love permeating, reaching self more effectively, because the illumination, the luminosity of all that is divine and perfect in its nature and whole, and unconditional love that surpasses all understanding. It's indescribable. The beauty of it. There is nothing more beautiful in its radiance than the unconditional love that is expressed in all that is. That is yet to be recognized absolutely until there is the falling away and the collapse and the death of the embodiment that is keeping the integrity of the witness, as though it is partially liberated and is yet expressing in that manner, not for anyone or anybody any longer, and yet it is expressing for all that is. It is expressing for the divine consciousness, the ultimate reality, ultimate consciousness of all that is. That is what the witness will continue to do via Advaita Vedanta and via speech of non-duality. Impartial liberation in the witness of embodiment. There is a great shift and change in that, whereby the suffering and dis-ease of the sense of separation is no longer there. There's partial liberation. The me has collapsed and the seeker has collapsed, and the witness is left as self that's closer, in a sense, to the oneness of all that is, without the interference of the me and seeker now. The clarity is more obvious. And it's far more obvious once you have the me and the seeker out of the way, without all that ego and fear and belief that was contaminating the self from reaching out to all that is in oneness. Still reaching out as a witness with that desire to return. It is a sensation of a return. It is the apparent appearance as though there's a place or an experience it has yet to experience again and again and again and over and over and over. So in a sense, this is how the process appears regarding the apparent appearance of an evolving consciousness. The apparent appearance of all that is with the collective consciousness of self that is represented via embodiment, via partial liberation with the witness. And that is what is being witnessed, and that is what is spoke of in non-duality Advaita Vedanta. That is the open secret. That is the very rare message that is being delivered. And that is also, I'd go so far as saying, am I saying this? No. Collective consciousness. It's the self. It's via embodiment and via the witness. The witness is witnessing. Are these thoughts? They are akin and likened to thought forms of a glimpse of infinitude, a glimpse of beyond the veil, beyond finiteness, beyond the parameters of the embodiment and beyond the parameters of that which the witness can bear witness to happening. The witness is bearing witness to life happening, and all that is, it simply is bearing witness to that. And how is that evidential? It's evidential via embodiment. For there is no longer the me and the seeker interfering. Now, there is greater clarity about all that simply is. And in partial liberation, there is still uncertainty. In partial liberation, there is still the residual effects. Remember the residues that I mentioned about after the collapse of the me and seeker happened. There's a residue there. The residue is an embodiment. Then there are those habits of emotions of anger, frustration, but they are lessened to such a degree now that they're hardly even noticed anymore. The residue is when the old habits of the me and seeker are still present in the residues that, oh, I stubbed my toe. Was that my toe? Well, it's my embodiment's toe. But you'll notice that you'll be more tolerable than the me and seeker ever was to life happening. Because there is a surrender now. There is a kinship and a closeness with all that is now. Now that the me and seeker are out of the way. And now there's the witness with self and the collective consciousness that is one with all that is in partial liberation. Then life is more tolerable. Life is less annoying. The annoyances were caused via that sense of separation when the me and the seeker were at it. And the me and the seeker were causing all that distortion, all that interference, as the witness was trying to see the beauty, the beatitude, the beauty of all that is in its simplicity and in its radiance of perfection. And its wholeness and completeness and its infinitude. That's just beyond description of how beautiful that is. And even that is just a glimpse in partial liberation with the witness. It cannot even be imagined how or what type of experience can be experienced. But somehow, the witness of the self is already aware of that. It's the awareness of awareness. That is that awareness of awareness. The awareness that the witness is witnessing that process of the collective consciousness of the self, in a sense, evolving. And the witness still, in partial liberation and embodiment, cannot and will yet experience absolute liberation. Now, here's the kicker though. There is a catch. There's a catch in all this. Once the final process of liberation happens, after partial liberation, prior to the evidence of what is evidential in absolute liberation, has yet to be experienced by the witness of the self. That final stage to return with all that is in absolute liberation happens once the embodiment dies. And the embodiment fades and falls and collapses. Just as the seeker and just as the me did. Just as the me and seeker collapsed and fell away. Embodiment has the apparent appearance of collapsing and falling away, and then it's left with the self and the witness. The witness is witnessing that falling away and collapsing, and death of that embodiment that used to support, that once supported a me and a seeker. And then something extraordinary happens at that point, which cannot be evidenced and cannot be proven and cannot be shown to be an experience as what is happening there when the witness collapses, falls away. No longer partially liberated. It is then absolute liberation, and then it's permeating along with all that simply is, and it returns to the oneness. And that is what Advaita Vedanta, non-duality, is all about. Namaste.